On the 29th of April 2020, a press conference was hosted in Melbourne by three individuals: the Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt, mining billionaire Andrew Forrest, and an official from the Chinese Communist Party, a former cyber spy and current serving Victorian and Tasmanian Consul General Long Zhu. The purpose of the conference was to inform the public of a huge deal brokered between Andrew Forrest's charity, the Minderoo Foundation, and BGI Group, a Chinese biotech conglomerate. Forrest announced that Minderoo had set aside $320 million for the importation of 10 million PCR tests, as well as COVID testing machinery, and for teams of Chinese experts to travel to Australia. The equipment was all flown in on chartered flights, and according to Forrest, it was the federal government that approached him to ask for assistance in sourcing this equipment, with the understanding the funds would later be repaid by the government. Here are some highlights.
So I am absolutely delighted today to announce a groundbreaking and fundamental partnership for Australia between the Australian government and Minderoo and the pathology sector. Andrew, through his work, has been able to secure on behalf of the Australian government 10 million PCR coronavirus tests.
I can report that every single machine is here in Australia. 9 are under commissioning and 2 are under installation, of a total of 11 machines. And they are being equipped with, as you've heard from the Minister, 10 million tests. We set aside $320 million to assist Australia any way we could, and this was a business-to-business relationship. I would just like to thank BGI, Chairman Wang. Your integrity to withstand the attacks on the supply lines between yourself and myself is unimpeachable. I would like to thank you and all of you at BGI. I would like now to introduce a representative of China, our Consul General for Victoria, and a person who obviously is very proud of BGI.
Let me, on behalf of the Chinese Ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Chen Jingye, and on my own behalf, express our warm congratulations and heartfelt appreciations to Minderoo and the BGI. As is known to all, China has attached great importance to international health cooperation. The Chinese government has released information related to the COVID-19 in an open, transparent, and responsible manner. And we have worked closely with WHO and other countries, including shared experiences in epidemic prevention and control, and providing assistance within our capacity. So we are also doing everything possible to help Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, the virus knows no ideology, border, or race. We are all in this together.
And do you fear, for example, if Australia doesn't back off on China, that Fortescue's exports could be affected?
No, look, the question itself is interesting, but doesn't go to the huge depth of relationship which exists between the business community on both sides and the trust and the friendship.
Today is actually an example of cooperation and success. The work that Andrew and Nicola and Minderoo have done with their counterparts, the very welcome and appreciated message from the Consul General, and I thank you for the partnership that we have struck between our two countries.
Question for the Consul General.
We'll do that separately.
Question for the Consul General.
We'll do that separately.
Question for the Consul General.
We'll do that separately.
Now there's a few red flags here. 1. By the end of April, it appears the government had probably already secured sufficient PCR test supply. Here's why I'm saying this. Dean Whiting, the Chief Executive of Pathology Technology Australia, was shocked by the deal. He said, quote, "Where we have a problem here was that there was a complete lack of transparency up front and a complete lack of consultation." He went on to say, "We had completed and submitted a very detailed audit of the current technology already available in Australian laboratories for this kind of testing, and we had determined there was more than enough technology already in the field to significantly ramp up testing." And to further support Whiting's statement, once these tests landed, they were immediately transferred to the nation's stockpile and were expected to never be used. 2. The federal government is capable of financing $320 million, especially for an operation that it considers to be in the best interest of public health. Simply put, the federal government did not need Andrew Forrest's money. JobKeeper alone was funded to the tune of $130 billion, so this seems quite peculiar. 3. Forrest implied that without his Chinese connections, this deal would never have been possible. But here's the thing. Since the inception of the COVID-19 crisis, BGI has exploited this situation to sell their tests and machineries all over the world. We're talking about 180 countries and counting. It's not as if you need to be somebody special to make an order with BGI. All you need to do is jump on their website, fill out an inquiry form, and provided you've got the money, BGI will deal with you. It's also important to note that BGI produces hundreds of thousands of these tests per day. Their capacity to produce is enormous. It's not as if we needed to bring 10 million kits into Australia at once. What we could have done was simply bring the kits in as we needed them based on the figures and statistics and what we knew at the time. 4. The presence of Long Zhu. Now, it doesn't appear that Long Zhu was involved in this deal with BGI. So the question is, why was he there and why did Andrew Forrest invite him? When Long Zhu did take the microphone, he seized the opportunity to praise the Chinese Communist Party for their handling of COVID-19. But unlike Labour MP Shoket Moselman, Long Zhu was spared having his home raided by ASIO. Long Zhu's presence also prompted concerns from several in Canberra. Federal MP Andrew Hastie said, quote, "Mr. Forrest should focus on his business interests and let the government run its foreign policy. Now is not the time for games. Australia must come first." The opposition Health Minister Chris Bowen said, quote, "Australians deserve transparency about the handling of the COVID crisis and transparency about contractual arrangements, particularly in regards to large sums of money." The former Resources Minister Matt Canavan said, "No proud nation should put themselves in a position where another country can dictate its foreign policy." So here's how I see it. Any contract with a foreign nation that involves large sums of money and the importation of equipment of a sensitive nature that has both national health and national security implications should be free from private interests, open and transparent, and ultimately handled by the federal government, not a private businessman who was A, not democratically elected to a position of trust, B, could be putting the interests of a foreign nation ahead of Australia, and C, has a deeply vested interest in China's economy, which I'll get to more in a bit. I also find it extraordinary that the government would seek the advice of a mining magnate over the advice of Pathology Technology Australia, who are our nation's leading experts in medical testing. In August this year, the Australian filed a Freedom of Information request to the Department of Health for the purpose of releasing details of this deal between Minderoo and BGI. That request was unfortunately knocked back. So you got to ask yourself the question, could there be a conflict of interest here? According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the term conflict of interest is defined by the following: a conflict between the private interests and the official responsibilities of a person in a position of trust. Now here's the deal. Andrew Forrest made his billions and continues to make his billions off selling iron ore to China. On the flip side, the CCP is in the midst of an aggressive strategy called Made in China 2025, which is an initiative to dominate emerging global markets, including biotechnology and pharmaceuticals. So maybe there was something in it for both sides. I'm not saying that for sure, and I'm not saying that this is a smoking gun, but considering that Forrest demanded the Australian people to trust him, it's only fair that we put him under the microscope. I'm going to read through some bullet points here on Andrew Forrest, his work, and some other related information. Andrew Forrest is the founder and former CEO of Fortescue Metals, a multi-billion-dollar Australian iron ore company. As of 2019, according to Forbes, Forrest was the 7th richest person in Australia with a net worth of $4.3 billion. The primary customer of Fortescue Metals is China. To date, China depends on Australia for over 60% of its iron ore needs. In February this year, Forrest purchased 22 million shares in Fortescue Metals for $249 million, making him the biggest shareholder at over 36%. He made the purchase when investors were fleeing the share market due to COVID concerns. Last financial year, the share price of Fortescue Metals soared. And although other countries' demand for iron ore decreased, China's demand remained strong. Last financial year resulted in Fortescue Metals turning its biggest recorded profit, resulting in Forrest banking just shy of $2 billion. So what do you reckon? Do you think there could have been a bit of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours? I'll get your biotech and pharmaceuticals into the Australian market, you keep buying my iron ore, and let's all make money together. I think it's interesting that China has threatened just about every Australian industry apart from iron ore. And that's simply because without Australian iron ore, China stops. No more military, no more infrastructure, and no more industrial expansion. I think it's insane and reckless that the government put someone like Forrest in charge of facilitating such a sensitive matter. And I consider it a slap in the face to the Australian public that the Freedom of Information request was knocked back.